He smiled before he pushed me. They called it an accident. I remember the laughter, the echo of children running through the hallways, and sunlight slipping across the pine floorboards. Morning Light Lodge was supposed to heal old cracks between me and my sister Julia. I had agreed to come, despite the chill between us, thinking maybe, at 55, it was time to let old wounds fade. Instead, the place became a ledger of betrayal written in bruises. The morning began with warmth. Coffee steam rose from my red mug, a scent that always reminded me of home. Julia teased that I'd packed too many scarves, and her husband, Mark, laughed in that easy, confident way that made everyone else believe he was harmless. He carried my travel bag up the stairs, insisting I rest. I remember thanking him. I remember trusting him. But something in his smile, tight, almost rehearsed, clung to me as I followed. The wood creaked beneath our steps, the house humming like it held a secret. He turned at the landing, still smiling, and said softly, "You really should watch your step." Then the world tilted. The sound of the fall was the last honest thing in that house. My back hit wood, my head struck the rail, and time folded into silence. I woke to hospital light, antiseptic air, and Julia's trembling hand in mine. She whispered, "You slipped," as if convincing herself. Mark stood behind her, holding my scarf, the same one he'd been carrying when I fell. The nurse's pen scratched against a clipboard nearby, the sound steady, unfeeling. She asked questions. "Do you recall what happened? Did you lose balance?" I heard my voice answer. He was right in front of me. But her eyes darted to the clock instead of me, and the word accident found its way into the report like dust settling on truth. I told myself I wouldn't let it matter, that I'd heal, that forgiveness was easier than proof. But lying in that hospital bed, wrapped in white sheets and disbelief, I noticed something strange. The faint rhythm of my heart monitor matched the tempo of footsteps in the hall. Mark's shoes, heavy and sure. Every step closer sent that sound climbing higher. When he entered, he smiled again. "How are you feeling?" "Alive," I said. He chuckled. "Then it wasn't so bad." His voice was gentle, but it carried a thread of ownership. Julia hovered near the door, eyes wide but silent. The nurse returned, clipboard in hand, murmuring something about paperwork. Mark answered for me, signed his name on a release form. His name where mine should have been. That was when it began, the slow erasure of my version of the story. The hospital would later file it as domestic misstep, non-malicious. But that line, those words, cut deeper than the fall itself, because non-malicious meant safe, and nothing about that smile had ever been safe. The days blurred. Visitors came and went, their voices kind, their eyes careful. They said, "You must have been tired," or "Wooden stairs can be tricky." Each phrase another coat of paint over what really happened. I found comfort in small details instead. The hum of machines, the faint scent of detergent, the way sunlight touched the photo frame by my bedside. That frame held a picture of us before the fractures began. Julia's hand on my shoulder, Mark in the background, half-turned, already looking elsewhere. At night, the silence felt alive, whispering memory back into motion. I replayed the moment, the tilt, the loss of air, the echo of my body against the steps. I knew then that accidents don't smile before they happen. People do. By the third day, the doctor said I was strong enough to stand. I tried, gripping the railing by the bed. My ribs screamed, but I stood anyway. My vow wasn't spoken aloud. It didn't need to be. The sound of my fall would not be the last thing that defined me. When Julia came to take me home, she carried my bag again, lighter now. I asked where the rest of my things were. She said, "Mark packed them up. He wanted to be helpful." I nodded, watching her avoid my eyes. Outside, the wind rattled against the ambulance door, a rhythm too familiar. Back at the lodge, the staircase waited, polished, spotless, as if it hadn't been complicit. I stared at it, tracing each step upward with my gaze, and whispered to myself, "He called it gravity. I called it intent." The sound lingered, steady as breath. The warmth of the fire returned that evening, the children's laughter echoing from another room, and the air pretended to forget. But I didn't. I couldn't. Because some falls don't end when the body stops moving. They keep echoing, waiting for the moment someone finally listens. They asked if I tripped. The question came before the coffee even cooled. Julia's voice was careful, sweetened by habit but curdled by fear. Mark stood beside her, carving pancakes like he was cross-examining the morning itself. I sat at the table, wrist-wrapped, ribs aching beneath my sweater. "You missed a step, didn't you?" he asked, not waiting for my answer. His tone was soft, but it built a wall between us, one that no truth could climb. The nurse had stopped by earlier, clipboard in hand. "Routine check," she said, though her eyes lingered too long on the bruises. She'd written accidental fall in her report, but her silence betrayed something else. When she left, Mark followed her out, closing the door with a sound too precise to be casual. I remember the light filtering through the blinds, sharp, punishing, turning every dust particle into a spotlight on my doubt. At breakfast, Julia placed a plate in front of me, her hand trembling. "Eat something," she whispered. I nodded, though my appetite had vanished with the fall. I caught my reflection in the kitchen mirror across the counter. A thin line traced along my jaw, yellow fading into violet. It wasn't the mark that hurt. It was the denial that followed it. "Gravity plays tricks," Mark said, "especially when you're tired." "Maybe," I replied, my voice steadier than I felt. He smiled, cutting through another pancake. "See? We all lose balance sometimes." "Not all of us push first," I wanted to say, but the words never made it out. Julia glanced between us, trapped in the space where truth gasps for air. Her silence was loyalty dressed as fear. When I reached for the syrup, my hand shook, and a drop fell onto the table. The stains spread slowly, like guilt with nowhere to hide. After he left for work, the house exhaled. Julia busied herself with dishes, her movements quick, mechanical. "He didn't mean it," she murmured. "He's under pressure at the office." The sound of water hitting porcelain drowned her excuses. I wanted to ask what kind of man smiles before violence, but I didn't. Instead, I stared at the mirror again, watching light dance over the crack that split its corner, a silent witness to the life we pretended wasn't shattering. My phone buzzed on the counter, a message from Mark. "Sorry about the scare. Maybe next time hold the rail tighter." My stomach twisted. I typed, "You were behind me." Then deleted it, typed again, deleted again. My reflection waited for me to be braver. I wasn't. That evening, the nurse returned for follow-up vitals. She checked my pulse, then lowered her voice. "You remember the fall, right?" "I remember everything." She looked at me for a moment too long, then scribbled something on her notepad. "If you need to talk, I'll be on call till Thursday." I nodded, and she slipped out the door, like someone smuggling mercy. The hours stretched thin. Julia reheated dinner, the smell of burnt toast filling the kitchen. "Just rest," she said. But I couldn't. Every creak of the staircase sounded like a replay. Every flicker of light through the blinds felt like an accusation. Silence pressed against the walls, thick enough to feel. Late that night, another message arrived from him. "Hope you're not making this bigger than it is." I stared at it until the screen dimmed. My reflection hovered faintly over the glass, a ghost version of myself that still believed in fairness. I tapped delete, then turned the phone face down, as if that could end the story. I sat by the window, the room half lit by the moon. My body throbbed, but not from the fall. It was the ache of being unseen. The nurse's note, Julia's trembling hands, Mark's polished words, all threads in the same quiet denial. I realized then that the truth doesn't always need enemies. Sometimes it just needs witnesses who look away. The morning light returned too bright, too cruel. It bled through the blinds, splitting the room into bars of gold and shadow. I used to think light meant safety, clarity, warmth, but that day it felt like judgment itself. Even the sunlight turned against me. Bills told stories no one wanted to read. I first noticed it on a quiet Wednesday when the mail stacked higher than usual. Among the envelopes, insurance notices, pharmacy slips, hospital statements, was one marked from the bank. I almost set it aside, but something about the paper felt different, heavier, deliberate. The texture caught under my thumb, rough like truth pushing through polite lies. Inside, numbers glared back at me. Withdrawals, each for $4,200, labeled home improvement. I looked around the house. Not a single nail had been hammered. No paint fumes, no sawdust, no change. Just the same quiet walls pretending nothing was wrong. My breath tightened as I traced the ink, dark and smooth, the handwriting too neat to be mine. And at the bottom, my name, my signature. Except it wasn't. It was his, dressed as mine. When Julia came home that evening, she smelled faintly of detergent and worry. "You got the mail?" I asked. She nodded, setting down her keys. "There's something you should see." Her eyes flickered, just once, toward the window. "Mark said he handled the accounts," she replied softly. "I never asked him to. He said you wanted him to take care of things while you were recovering." Recovering. The word burned, as if healing meant handing over control. I laid the statement in front of her. $4,200, 5 times. My name's on it. Julia's face paled. She looked at the page, but not at me. "He told me you signed it yourself." "And you believed him?" She hesitated. "He said you forgot." "I forget where I put my keys, not where I put my trust." Her lip trembled, but she didn't answer. I watched her thumb the corner of the paper, smudging the ink slightly, a tiny, perfect metaphor for what was happening to us. Later that night, after the house fell quiet, I spread every statement across the dining table. The numbers lined up like a confession written in digits. The lamp above cast a circle of light over the ledger, and my fingers followed each signature, memorizing the pressure, the slant, the betrayal. I started a notebook of my own, plain cover, unmarked. I wrote each date, each amount, each lie. The pen scratched against the page like an echo of my own pulse. 4,200, I murmured, as if saying it aloud might make it less absurd. The total, $21,000, hung in the air like a debt not of money, but of trust. The next morning, I went to the bank. The teller was kind, maybe too kind. "We can verify signatures," she said, typing briskly. Her nails clicked against the keys, steady as a metronome. She pulled up my account and frowned. "These were submitted in person, all within 2 weeks." "By who?" She hesitated. "By someone who signed your name." The bank couldn't say more without a formal complaint. I thanked her anyway. Her eyes lingered on me, the way someone looks at a story they're not sure they want to know. She handed me copies of each record, each stamped with a small entry ID, B4739. I tucked them into an envelope, feeling the edge of the paper against my skin. The texture was dry, grainy, too real to ignore. Back home, Julia waited in the kitchen. The mirror above the counter caught her reflection, her hands twisting a dish towel like a confession waiting to snap. "He said it was a misunderstanding," she whispered. "It's theft. He promised to fix it." "He's not fixing anything. He's rewriting history." The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was thick, weighted with every unspoken truth. I folded the envelope once, twice, sealing it with the kind of finality you don't come back from. My voice was low when I said it, but steady. If he's forging signatures now, he'll start forging people next. That night, I placed the envelope inside the drawer of my bedside table, my own private evidence vault. The wooden grain under my fingertips felt rough, grounding. I whispered a vow into the quiet. No more missing pages. I would document everything, every number, every mark, every lie. Outside, the wind rustled against the windows like paper turning itself. I couldn't sleep, but I didn't need to. The proof was already alive between those pages, inked, numbered, undeniable. His lies had receipts, painkillers loosened tongues. I was back in the hospital for a follow-up, the same corridor where the walls hummed with quiet dread. The scent of antiseptic hung heavy, clean, but suffocating, as if it was trying to scrub away what couldn't be unseen. A clipboard clattered somewhere behind a curtain. That sound, the hollow tap of paperwork, had become the rhythm of my new life. Every form, every question, every careful signature now felt like another test of how much truth I was allowed to say out loud. The nurse adjusting my bandage looked older than last time, her face kind but tight with something unspoken. She whispered, almost too quietly to catch, "You didn't hear this from me, but he talks too loud when he thinks no one's listening." I froze. "Who?" Her eyes darted toward the hallway. "Your brother-in-law, Mark." I sat still, afraid to breathe too loud. She leaned closer, voice trembling against the antiseptic sting in the air. "He told another nurse that accidents pay better when they're family." The words landed like glass shards in my chest. I could almost hear them echoing down the corridor, bouncing off those pale green tiles that never stopped smelling of bleach and pretense. For a moment, everything else disappeared. The monitor's beep, the wheeled trays, the squeak of shoes. Just that sentence, looping. "Accidents pay better when they're family." "He said that?" My voice came out flat, disbelieving. She nodded once. "In the staff lounge, room 206, didn't notice me there." "Did anyone else hear?" "One of the aides. She walked out." I looked at her ID tag, thin chain, slightly tarnished, the name fading from touch. "Would you write it down?" I asked quietly. She hesitated, glancing toward the door. "That would be complicated. My supervisor checks everything that leaves this floor." "I understand," I said. "You don't have to risk it." Her gaze softened. "You deserve someone to believe you." That was all she said, but belief, even whispered, felt like oxygen. After she left, I sat alone in the sterile room, tracing the corner of the curtain between my fingers. The fabric smelled faintly of detergent and fear. I imagined Mark walking that same hallway, confident, charming, practicing his version of the story until it became truth. He'd always been good with words, sharp enough to wound, calm enough to pass inspection. The door opened slightly. A man in a security uniform peeked in. "Ma'am, visiting hours are ending soon." "I'm a patient." He blinked, then nodded, embarrassed. "Sorry, I didn't realize." That small mistake, the assumption I didn't belong here, hit me harder than I expected. It was the same way Mark operated. Make people question what they already know, one small nudge at a time. When the nurse returned to remove the IV, I whispered, "If anyone asks, tell them I left early." She frowned. "Are you sure?" "Yes, just say I signed the discharge form." I needed to see room 206 for myself. I slipped down the hallway, slow, deliberate. The scent of disinfectant grew stronger, clinging to my clothes like guilt. Through the cracked door, I saw 2 chairs, a half-empty coffee cup, and a notice board. No one was there, but the air felt disturbed, like words had just been spoken and refused to fade. On the table lay a folded note. I shouldn't have, but I opened it. 3 words. Not an accident. No signature, no context. Maybe it was left for someone else. Or maybe it was meant for me. I folded it again and slid it into my pocket, my hand trembling against the paper's grain. That night I pressed the note flat on my bedside table, beside the envelope of forged receipts. My collection of proof was small but growing, a quiet army of details waiting for daylight. The hospital smell still lingered on my hands, no matter how much I washed them. Before turning off the light, I whispered to the dark, "He's been practicing this for a long time." My voice felt steadier now, colder, because it wasn't just the fall anymore. It was the performance surrounding it. Every word rehearsed, every gesture calculated. He'd practiced my fall before I ever stumbled. Julia's eyes became his currency. When she called that night, her voice trembled through the receiver like a trapped bird. "Please," she whispered, "don't go to the police. He'll ruin me too." Behind her voice, the heater hummed, a low, steady note, comfort and warning folded into one. I could almost feel the air through the phone, thick with panic, her breath catching between words. I didn't answer right away. I just listened to the pauses. Each one felt like a price being negotiated for silence. "Julia," I said finally, "he already has." She started crying, softly at first. "You don't understand. He has everything. The house, the accounts. He said he'd tell people I was unstable, that I knew." "Knew what?" "That he took the money. That you're making it up." The heater clicked, and her sobs cut out. Then a sharp inhale. "He said if you keep pushing, he'll bring me down with him." I saved the voicemail immediately. The timestamp blinked 11:47 p.m. I played it back twice. Each pause between her words grew colder, as if the air itself was withdrawing from us both. I pressed the phone to my chest until it hurt. The next morning, the lawyer's office smelled faintly of burnt coffee and printer toner. Papers rustled like restless ghosts. "You've got a case," he said, "but family law isn't about truth. It's about endurance." His voice was calm, but the sentence landed heavy. He looked up from the folder in front of him. "Do you have proof?" I slid the phone across the desk. "Voicemail. Dated, clear audio. She admits blackmail." He pressed play, listening carefully, his expression hardening halfway through. "He's using her as leverage," he said. "That complicates things. She won't testify." "She doesn't have to. Her voice already did." He nodded slowly, scribbling something on a yellow pad. "You'll need to prepare for retaliation. If he's this careful, he's already building a counterstory." "I expect it," I said. "But he won't own mine." He smiled faintly, the kind of smile people wear when they've seen too many versions of the same pain. "Keep everything documented. Make copies. Hide the originals somewhere safe." When I left his office, the winter air bit through my coat. The city was gray, washed out. I found myself at a cafe, nursing a cup of tea gone cold, staring at the wedding ring still on my sister's hand in a picture saved on my phone. The metal caught the light like an accusation. Julia texted me later. "I can't talk right now. He's home." I wanted to call her back, to say something, anything that would pull her free. But I knew how control works. It doesn't shout, it bargains. It trades dignity for safety, silence for temporary peace. That night, I sat by the window, folder open on my lap. Receipts, bank records, the nurse's whispered note, all stacked neatly. Beneath them, the printed transcript of Julia's voicemail. I touched the top page, tracing her words as though they might still be warm. But they weren't. The heater had stopped hours ago, and the house had cooled to the temperature of consequence. I called the lawyer again. "If she won't testify," I said, "can I still move forward?" "Yes," he said, "but it'll get messy. He'll attack your credibility. He might drag her through it anyway." "I know." "You're certain you want this?" "He's counting on me to back down," I said. "He's betting on silence." Outside, the wind howled against the window pane, its voice raw and impatient. I pressed record on my phone again, not for evidence this time, but for memory. The sound of truth breathing in cold air. Julia sent one last message before midnight. "Don't make him angry." I stared at it for a long time before deleting it. Fear had lived in our bloodline long enough. The next morning, I filed the complaint. The folder clasp snapped shut with a metallic click that echoed through the room. It sounded final, like a door closing behind me. I whispered into the still air. He owned her silence, but not mine. The math never lied. The banker slid the papers across the desk, each sheet faintly warm from the copier. "You were right to ask for an audit," she said. The word audit sounded too clinical for what it uncovered. My hands trembled as I lifted the first page. 5 withdrawals, each for $3,500. Identical timestamps, spaced a week apart. It wasn't just theft, it was choreography. I ran my fingertips over the page, feeling the grain of the paper. It almost pulsed, like the guilt of the one who'd signed it. "He used the joint account," I murmured. The banker hesitated, then nodded. "All with your authorization code." I let out a low breath. "Then he's been watching me type it." She frowned. "You can request an access limit. Lock him out completely." "I will," I said. "Today." The pen felt heavier than it should have as I signed the restriction form. The paperweight on her desk caught the morning light. Smooth, unyielding, honest. I envied it. That afternoon, the call came. Mark's voice, calm but slicing. "So, you're cutting me out?" "I'm protecting what's left." He chuckled, the kind of laugh that doesn't reach the lungs. "People are starting to wonder about you. Julia said you've been paranoid lately." "Paranoid?" "You're seeing patterns where there aren't any. Money, voices, shadows. Maybe all this stress is making you imagine things." I didn't answer. The silence between us stretched, long enough for me to hear his confidence flicker. Then I said softly, "Numbers don't imagine things. They record them." He hung up. The next day, I returned to the bank to meet the internal auditor, a young woman with the kind of sharp focus I'd begun to admire in strangers. She showed me the digital log, each withdrawal made within seconds of Julia's phone calls to me. Coincidence was now arithmetic. "We can trace the terminal location," she said. "Do you want to know?" "Yes." She turned the screen. My stomach tightened. The transactions came from a branch 3 blocks from his office. "Send me a certified copy," I told her. When I left, the sky was gray, low with unspent rain. The city always felt quieter when truth started to surface, as if sound itself took a step back to make room. I stopped by a small stationery shop on the corner, bought a folder, and wrote in neat, deliberate letters across the front. Reference B2189. Ledger of Shadows. I didn't know why I named it that. Maybe because every lie he told left a numerical shadow behind. That night, Julia called again. Her voice was tired, a hollow version of the woman who once sang while washing dishes. "Mark said you froze the accounts. How could you?" "He used them, Julia. He forged my name." "He said you told him to." "Look at me," I whispered, though she couldn't see. "You know my voice. Do I sound like someone who'd hand him a key after he pushed me down a staircase?" She didn't reply. The silence hurt more than denial. After the call, I laid out all the documents on my kitchen table. Receipts, statements, signatures. The calculator blinked 17,500, a number that had become both evidence and epitaph. Beneath it, the creased note where I'd written my vow weeks ago, no more erasing. I rubbed the ridge of the paper with my thumb until it warmed beneath my skin. Proof felt alive now, almost human. I folded everything back into the folder, pressed the paperweight down, and whispered, "Access limit." 2 days later, I heard from a neighbor that Mark had been seen at the bank, red-faced, demanding answers. Rumor spread faster than math ever could. By evening, he'd already rewritten the story. The poor man with a hysterical sister-in-law, the fragile woman inventing crimes to feel control. The community believed him because charisma always sounds truer than arithmetic. But the ledger didn't lie. The withdrawals were time-stamped, the signatures forged, the totals exact. I sent the copies to my lawyer with a short note. "Let him talk. I have numbers." Then I turned off the lights, sat by the window, and let the quiet stretch until it felt clean again. Numbers, unlike people, don't gaslight. The vase fell before I touched it. 1 second it was standing between us, bright, fragile, whole, and the next it shattered. A burst of glass and noise slicing through the calm. Julia screamed. The therapist flinched. My pulse went cold. For a heartbeat, even the air seemed to pause. Then came her voice, sharp and trembling. "She lunged at me!" I hadn't moved. My hands were still folded in my lap. The clock on the wall ticked once, twice, louder than any breath in the room. The therapist stood slowly, clipboard pressed to her chest. "Julia, please sit down." "She tried to hit me." "I didn't," I said quietly. "The vase just fell." Her eyes flashed with panic, or maybe guilt. I couldn't tell anymore. Glass glimmered on the carpet, catching the light in broken patterns. The therapist bent to pick up the largest shard, her reflection bending and multiplying in the curve of it. "No aggression observed," she muttered, writing something in the margin of her notes. I watched her pen move, neat and calm, as if documenting the anatomy of a lie. Julia sobbed into her hands, and for the first time, I felt no pity, only distance. "He told you to do this," I said under my breath. Her head snapped up. "What?" "Mark, he's testing what people will believe." She shook her head, too fast, too rehearsed. "You're paranoid. You think everyone's working against you." The therapist glanced between us, uncertain which truth to follow. I leaned back, eyes on the clock. "He's rewriting me," I said softly. "And you're the ink." The session ended early. Outside, the sunlight was blinding. I waited for Julia in the parking lot, but she hurried past without meeting my eyes, her phone already at her ear. I didn't need to guess who was on the other end. The same man who'd taught her to smile through betrayal and call it survival. Back home, I replayed the moment in my mind, the vase tipping, the sound it made, the way light fractured through every shard before settling into silence. It wasn't an accident. It was a performance. And the therapist, by writing "possible emotional stressor, no aggression observed," had unknowingly preserved the truth inside her report like a seed under ice. A transcript that would bloom later, when warmth returned. The clock in my kitchen ticked the same way the office clock had. I counted every sound between seconds until it became unbearable. Time itself had started to accuse me. I picked up my phone and called the therapist. "Did you send today's session report to your archive?" "Yes," she said carefully. "It's logged under case reference T0416. Why?" "Because it might become evidence," I said. "Not for now, but one day." She hesitated. "I'll keep it secure." For a long while, I stared at the sunlight pooling across the floor, reflecting off the smallest glass fragment I'd carried home in my coat pocket. I shouldn't have kept it, but part of me needed proof that I hadn't imagined any of it, that something had truly broken. Later that evening, Julia texted, "You scared me. Please don't come near me for a while." I almost laughed. He'd done it, turned her fear into my weapon. I wrote back, "Take care of yourself." That was all. The rest of what I wanted to say wouldn't survive in writing. At midnight, I woke to the faint glimmer of light against that same shard on my nightstand. The room felt colder than before. I whispered into the quiet, "He's in the room without being here." The glass seemed to answer back, reflecting only fragments, never a whole face, never a whole truth. 2 days later, I received the session summary in the mail. The therapist's note was clinical, detached. Subject exhibited calm under accusation. Secondary party displayed acute distress. Below it, a line I hadn't expected. Observation. Emotional control may serve as defense mechanism against external manipulation. For once, someone had written something real. I folded the page carefully and placed it into the growing folder of evidence, sliding it beneath the envelope marked B2189. The sound of the paper sliding into place was small but certain, like another brick laid in a wall I was finally building around my sanity. The clock ticked on, steady, merciless, and in that rhythm, I heard the truth repeat itself over and over, proof disguised as time. Even therapy became his witness. Some truths are safer on paper. Every night I wrote to my mother, though she'd been gone for years. It wasn't grief. It was survival. The only place I could speak without being corrected was on a page no one would ever read. I kept the letters in a box beneath my bed, folded and tied with a red ribbon that once held her hairbrush together. Words became a refuge when the world no longer believed my version of it. Then one night, I did something different. I mailed one. The candle beside me flickered as I sealed the envelope, the wax soft under my thumb. The air smelled faintly of smoke and lavender, a scent that always made me think of her kitchen, her patience. I addressed it to her old house, our house, though I knew it was owned by strangers now. It wasn't about delivery. It was about release. A confession written into silence. 2 weeks later, the letter came back. Return to sender. But when I opened it, there was something else inside. An extra sheet. My handwriting, but not my words. You lied about the fall, it read. You needed attention. You ruined your family. The paper felt wrong. The ink strokes too deliberate, the pressure uneven. My breath caught in my throat. Whoever had forged it knew how I curved my L's and crossed my T's. I could almost hear his laugh behind it. I went to the post office the next morning, envelope in hand. The clerk, a gray-haired man with careful eyes, examined the wax seal. This was opened, he said, then resealed, crudely. He turned it toward the light, revealing a hairline crack through the wax. See that ridge? Someone lifted it and pressed it again. Can you tell where? I asked. He pointed to the faint postal code at the bottom corner. Branch downtown. Someone intercepted it before it left the city. I swallowed hard. Can you prove it? He looked at me for a moment, then nodded. We'll log it under tampering report reference D21173. You'll get a copy. For the first time in months, I felt something I hadn't dared to. Validation. A stranger believed me. Not out of sympathy, but because evidence existed. The envelope wasn't just paper. It was a witness. That night, I lit another candle, its flame trembling against the glass. The scent of burning wax filled the room again. I unfolded one of the older letters, the one where I'd written, If anyone ever doubts me, let the truth find its own delivery. I hadn't realized I was predicting this moment. I started a new letter, this time not to my mother, but to myself. You are not crazy. You are careful. You are awake. The words steadied my hands. I tucked it into a fresh envelope, pressed a new wax seal, and stored it with the others. I didn't need to send it. Some messages don't travel through miles. They travel through memory. The next day, the postal clerk called. We traced the interference, he said. Whoever did it used an internal clearance code. It narrows the list to 2 employees. Will they face charges? Possibly, but it might take time. We've flagged it. Keep that envelope safe, I said quietly. It's not just mail. It's proof. After the call, I stood by the window, the morning sun cutting across my table. Every letter I'd written lay there, dozens of folded lives in pale paper stacks. Some pages curled slightly at the corners from the heat of past candles, like they'd been singed by the truths I couldn't say aloud. I picked up the forged one again, holding it under the light. The imitation of my handwriting looked almost perfect, except for one thing. Whoever wrote it didn't know that I always looped the tail of my why twice when I meant something sincere. In those forged sentences, every sorry was straight and sharp. His lies had no curves. I pressed the false page flat, placed it inside a plastic sleeve, and added a sticky note. Evidence. Letter anomaly. Tampering reference D21173. The act felt official, steadying. My grief was now documented. My ghosts were now traceable. That night, as the candle burned low, a soft haze filled the room. The flame wavered, just enough to make the shadows move. For a moment, I imagined my mother's voice in that flicker. Keep writing. They can't forge your truth forever. The wax melted down to its base, sealing the silence one last time, and I whispered back into the smoke. My ghosts were finally traceable. He forgot to hide the number. It was after midnight when the phone rang, one of those thin, brittle rings that slice through silence like a blade. I hesitated before answering. "Hello?" A pause, then a whisper that crawled across the line. "Drop it, or fall again." My throat tightened. The hum in the receiver wasn't just sound. It felt alive, vibrating against my palm like a second heartbeat. I didn't hang up. I let the silence stretch until the caller did. The clock on the wall read 12:17 a.m. The glow from the street lamp hit the phone cord, twisting it into a noose of light. I sat there, listening to the faint click as the call disconnected, wondering how many seconds it takes for fear to turn into evidence. I called the police. My voice barely worked at first. "I just received a threat," I said. "It wasn't random. It was him." The dispatcher's tone changed instantly. "Stay on the line, ma'am. Do you have caller ID?" "Yes." I stared at the number on the screen. He forgot to block it. An officer arrived within the hour. He was young, with tired eyes that had seen too much disbelief. His badge caught the porch light, a dull flash of authority that somehow made the night feel heavier. "Can we trace the number?" I asked. "We can try," he said, connecting his phone to a small device. "Most of these calls get rerouted, but we'll see what sticks." While he worked, I poured coffee that neither of us drank. The smell of it, burnt and bitter, hung in the air. After a few minutes, his screen blinked. He looked up. "It's from a business line, registered to a corporate office downtown." "Which one?" He hesitated. "It's your brother-in-law's office." I didn't speak. The hum from the receiver still seemed to echo in my ear. He scrolled further, reading the data aloud. "Time logged at 12:14. Duration, 42 seconds. No masking software used." So he wanted me to know it was him. "Looks that way," the officer said. He filled out the incident report while I watched the pen move. "This will create an official record," he explained. "But off the record, be careful. Paper doesn't stop gravity." I gave a dry, hollow laugh. "No, but sometimes it slows the fall." He looked at me then, not with pity, but something closer to respect. "We'll keep the trace active. If he calls again, let it ring twice before you answer. The system needs time to capture the ID." I nodded. "What happens if it's not him next time?" "Then we find out who's willing to sound like him." When he left, the house felt heavier than before, as if every wall had absorbed the echo of that threat. I sat by the window, watching the blue of the patrol lights fade into distance. The night returned to silence, except for the faint ring still looping in my head. The next morning, the police station called. The trace confirmed the number originated from Mark's office network, no doubt. They even logged the extension, internal line 204, tagged under his initials. "Would you like to file for a restraining order?" the clerk asked. "I just want it recorded," I said. "Let the file speak first." I opened my folder, already thick with documents, and added the new entry. Call log, reference A4319. The paper made a soft sound as it slid into place, like an exhale of truth. Later that day, Julia texted. "He says someone's framing him, that you're obsessed." I didn't answer. I knew the pattern by now. Denial first, charm second, rage last. The order never changed, only the audience. I replayed the call in my mind, trying to catch something in the background, a breath, a sound, a hesitation. And then I heard it again. The faint click of a desk drawer closing, the same one he'd slammed shut years ago after forging my signature. That tiny sound was his signature now, proof disguised as noise. By evening, I took the call log and the officer's report, placed them under the paperweight shaped like a small silver badge, and whispered, "You're in here now." The words weren't anger, they were inventory. Every cruelty needed a place to live until justice came to collect it. The phone sat quiet beside me, coiled cord resting like a sleeping serpent. The dial tone hummed when I lifted it, steady and low, a sound that once meant connection, but now meant control. I put it back gently, careful not to disturb the hum. He'd tried to haunt me through a line. Instead, he'd left a record. He was finally in the system. He forgot about the audit trail. The morning began like any other, until it didn't. The office felt colder that day, the kind of chill that doesn't come from air conditioning, but from tension breathing through vents. Every printer hum, every stapler click sounded like a countdown. I'd sent the files at dawn, copies of payroll slips showing $8,750 rerouted each month into a hidden account. The math didn't lie. The numbers had his fingerprints all over them. By 9, HR had summoned him. From my desk, I could hear muffled voices through the glass partition, measured tones breaking into panic. "You're accusing me?" he said. His laugh carried that brittle edge, the one he used when cornered. "She must have hacked the system. You know how unstable she's been." I sipped my coffee, bitter and burnt, watching the brown ring it left on the report I'd printed for myself. The stain looked almost deliberate, like a seal of intent. Proof doesn't always arrive clean, it just has to survive scrutiny. When HR called me in, the room smelled faintly of toner and cold air. The arbiter, as I quietly called her, sat behind the desk. Her hands were steady. "We've reviewed your submission," she said, sliding the documents forward. "The payroll discrepancies are real." He stood in the corner, eyes darting between us, his ID badge glinting beneath the fluorescent light. "She's twisting numbers," he insisted. "This is a vendetta." I met his gaze. "Numbers don't take sides," I said. "People do." The arbiter pressed a button on her keyboard. The screen behind her flickered alive with a spreadsheet, columns of names, totals, and one recurring entry under a ghost account labeled Vendor 43A7. She pointed to it. "These payments are unlinked from any active vendor. The transfer logs show your credentials time-stamped every 30 days. His jaw tightened. "You think I'd be that careless?" "No," I said quietly. "You think you'd be untouchable." He stepped forward, palms open, voice rising. "You have no idea how much damage you're causing." "Neither did you," I replied. The arbiter cleared her throat. "Enough. Your access will be temporarily suspended pending review." She turned to the assistant by the door. "Deactivate his credentials immediately." The sound of the stapler clicking across the room punctuated the silence like a verdict. He stared at me, disbelief bleeding into fury. "You think this ends me?" I held my ground. "I think it begins you." When he left the room, the air seemed to thaw slightly. I felt my pulse steady for the first time in weeks. My hands shook, but not from fear, more like voltage discharging after too long in the dark. The arbiter looked at me. "You've done the right thing. We'll need full cooperation as this moves forward." "Of course," I said. "Just make sure the records don't disappear." "They won't," she replied. "They're backed up under audit reference B9124. That code, that quiet string of characters, felt like armor. I nodded, thanked her, and stepped out into the corridor. The fluorescent lights hummed above me, indifferent witnesses to everything that had just shifted. Back at my desk, the phone buzzed, a message from Julia. "He's saying you framed him." I typed back, "Then let him prove it. He'll have to find numbers I didn't invent." The office noise returned slowly, the rhythmic click of keyboards, the low murmur of whispers, the mechanical breath of the copier spitting out more paper than truth. Still, I felt something new beneath it all, a steadiness I hadn't known in years. I opened the window slightly, letting in a thin draft of city air. It carried that sterile office smell mixed with faint asphalt heat. Somewhere below, life went on. By afternoon, an IT notice circulated. "User access revoked. Pending review." His name sat there in black and white, stripped of power, stripped of secrecy. I saved the email as proof, dragging it into my growing folder labeled Internal Verifications. Each file had its own weight. Some small, some heavy, but together they formed something undeniable. Before I shut down my computer, I took one last look at the frozen payroll sheet glowing on the screen. $8,750, again and again, like a pulse. Each entry a beat of guilt now measured in evidence instead of emotion. The clock read 5:46 p.m. I logged off. The system prompted. User session expired. A small smile formed before I could stop it. His passwords expired before his excuses did. Crowds love a scandal more than a truth. The town hall smelled of dust and tension. Rows of folding chairs scraped against the floor as reporters filled the front lines, notebooks in hand, eyes like lenses waiting for a tremor. The hum of the microphone tested the air, steady, electric, alive. When I stepped up to the stand, I could feel every gaze trying to measure my ruin before I spoke. He called it family management, I said. My voice carried cleanly, steadier than I expected. A ripple moved through the audience, that soft, collective sound people make when morality becomes entertainment. The lights above me were harsh, white, clinical. The glare turned faces into outlines, truth into theater. I held my breath just long enough to remind myself that this wasn't confession. It was evidence. The judge adjusted her glasses and lifted a document for all to see. The seal caught the light like a blade. "Restraining order," she read aloud. "County Court, Section 4118. The clerk stamped it once, the sound echoing like a gavel. The crowd murmured, restless. Across the aisle, he sat with his attorney, his tie crooked, his smirk rehearsed. The flash from a camera caught the brief flicker of rage in his eyes. A press photo would freeze it forever. Somewhere behind me, I heard the faint click of a pen, the rustle of a newspaper, already rewriting the scene. "Do you believe this is justice?" his lawyer asked, leaning forward. "I believe it's arithmetic," I said softly. "Debts balance when the truth is finally counted." A few in the audience laughed, nervous and unsure. The microphone buzzed, catching the tremor in the air. The judge spoke again. "Ms. Taylor, you stated under oath that financial misconduct occurred over a span of 7 months. Is that still your testimony?" "Yes, Your Honor, and I've provided proof of 2 redirected transfers, $8,750 each. You're aware those are serious accusations." "I am. That's why I brought serious evidence." The audience hushed. Even the reporter beside the aisle stopped typing. The officer at the door handed the bailiff an envelope. Inside was the printed statement from HR, marked Audit Reference B9124. It had taken weeks of silence and cold stares to get that page signed, but now it gleamed under the courtroom lights. When the clerk read the confirmation aloud, he finally spoke. "This is absurd," he snapped. "Those figures don't even exist in my department's budget." I turned toward him. "No, but they existed in mine, until you moved them." For a moment, the entire room went still, like the air itself was waiting for permission to exhale. The microphone hummed between us, the sound like a thin wire strung tight enough to cut. He shifted in his chair, eyes scanning the press section. "You think you can humiliate me in front of strangers?" "They're not strangers," I said. "They're witnesses." The judge's gavel tapped once. "Order." But the word hardly mattered. The order was already shifting. One reporter raised a hand. "Can you confirm," she asked the bench, "if the restraining order includes professional contact restrictions?" The judge nodded. "Yes, effective immediately." Another murmur swept the room, more audible this time. The crowd loved a public boundary. It felt like justice they could photograph. When the recess was called, I stepped down from the stand, my palms still tingling from the weight of the microphone. A woman in the second row caught my arm as I passed. "You did the right thing," she whispered. Her voice was trembling. "We've all seen what he does." I managed a nod. "Then speak when it's your turn." Outside, the press swarmed like weather. Flashbulbs burst in quick succession, white light burning into the corners of my vision. A reporter thrust a recorder near my face. "Do you feel vindicated?" I paused. "No," I said. I feel documented. Behind me, the courthouse doors creaked shut. Inside, his voice rose again, demanding to speak, demanding relevance. But outside, the sun cut through the clouds, sharp and merciless. The air smelled faintly of ink and heat. I watched the journalists file their stories on the courthouse steps, their headlines forming like prophecy. For years he'd owned the narrative. Now it belonged to paper and proof. I didn't need to convince them. I only had to let the evidence breathe. The witness met me by the steps, holding a folded newspaper already stamped with today's date. "They'll print the order in tomorrow's edition," she said. "Let them," I replied. "The truth finally has a byline." The flash of another camera hit the glass doors, scattering light across the stone floor inside. For the first time, it wasn't blinding. It was clarifying. Truth made better theater than lies. They projected the numbers on a wall. The courtroom dimmed as the blinds were drawn, and the projector's light carved the air into cold geometry. A long white rectangle glowed across the front wall, every digit enlarged, merciless. The accountant adjusted his glasses and began to read, his voice flat but cutting. Entry 1. Transfer of $8,750. Unauthorized. Entry 2. Same amount, new account, same timestamp pattern. The sound of chalk against logic. He fidgeted in his chair. Mark, the man who had once controlled every narrative, now cornered by arithmetic. The light from the projection stretched across his face, catching the sheen of sweat above his lip. Each number that appeared was another blow, precise and bloodless. Entry 5, the accountant continued. Total cumulative discrepancy, $43,750. The silence that followed had a weight of its own. The arbiter leaned forward, her notebook open, columns of notes drawn with a ruler's precision. "Confirm these transactions were processed under his credentials?" she asked. "Yes, ma'am," the accountant said. "Verified by system reference A6421. No alternate. User activity recorded." Her pen paused midair. "Then that settles it." I exhaled slowly, the kind of breath you take when the truth finally stops fighting to be heard. The courtroom's air felt textured, chalk dust, dry paper, the faint hum of the projector's fan. Every sense anchored me to that moment, to the quiet collapse of a lie built over years. Mark tried to reclaim the room. "Those reports were doctored," he said sharply, leaning forward. "Anyone could fabricate data. You don't understand how internal systems work." The arbiter didn't even look up. "Explain the missing funds, then." "They were reimbursements," he stammered. "Family expenses, joint matters." I cut in before he could shape another falsehood. "Then you'll have receipts, won't you?" He froze. The accountant turned another page, the paper rustling like judgment. "We requested documentation. None provided." 3 rows back, a reporter whispered to her colleague, "That's the 5th unanswered query." The flash of a camera illuminated the wall again. The projection blinked briefly, then steadied, his financial empire flickering one last time before disappearing into evidence. He turned toward me, eyes narrowed. "You think this proves anything?" "Yes," I said softly. "That numbers tell the truth people won't." The judge motioned for quiet. "Continue," she said to the accountant. He nodded, adjusting his slides. "Final entry. Unauthorized withdrawal from a charity-linked fund, timestamped March 12th. Documentation unavailable. Amount? $10,000. A few gasps scattered through the crowd. Even the journalists stopped writing. The judge's tone hardened. "You siphoned from a charitable account?" Mark rose halfway from his seat. "That's a misinterpretation." The arbiter's voice sliced clean through the noise. "Sit down. You've done enough interpreting." I felt the heat of the projector against my hand where it rested on the table. It wasn't just light. It was exposure, the kind that burned through disguise. He shifted again, clutching the edge of the bench, like gravity itself had betrayed him. When the projection ended, the accountant disconnected the cable. The wall went blank, and the sudden darkness felt almost merciful. but the silence that followed was louder than any accusation. Outside the courtroom windows, the late afternoon light had turned to gold, slanting across the floorboards. For a second, it brushed against the open notebook beside me, my own ledger, filled with notes and crossed-out fears. I traced one line with my fingertip. Every secret has a timestamp. The arbiter closed her file and stood. The record will reflect all confirmed entries, pending sentencing review. The reporters surged forward, pens clattering, lenses snapping open. Mark sat motionless, eyes fixed on the blank wall where his downfall had been projected. As the judge adjourned, I walked past him. The smell of stale cologne and defeat hung around him. He whispered, "You'll regret this." I stopped, my voice low enough for only him to hear. "No, you will, because regret still requires conscience." He didn't respond. The courtroom emptied slowly, footsteps echoing in the hall. I turned once more to the wall, the faint outline of numbers still lingering in my vision. They weren't just proof anymore. They were consequence measured to the decimal. His empire collapsed to a decimal. Applause sounds strange in a courtroom. For a moment, no one breathed. The judge's voice had carried clean through the chamber, each word deliberate, measured, final. "Restitution in the amount of $43,750, she said, to be repaid in full. Restraining order extended indefinitely." Her gavel fell once, sharp against the wooden bench, and the sound echoed like a closing door. Justice, it seemed, had a sound, hard, dry, absolute. Then came the pause, that strange suspended silence before reaction finds courage, and out of it, a single clap, then another, then a wave, applause, muted at first, then swelling, uncertain of its own place in that solemn hall. Applause doesn't belong among verdicts, but people crave punctuation when truth finally takes form. I didn't join them. My hand stayed still against the grain of the table, fingertips tracing the fine scratches that time had left in the wood. My sister, sitting 2 rows behind, pressed a tissue to her mouth. I could hear her breath break through the hush. I didn't turn to look. He stood there, the man who'd once decided which stories were allowed to exist. His face had gone pale, eyes darting toward the exits, calculating damage in real time. The arbiter beside the bench read from the judgment file, her tone unflinching. "Failure to comply within 30 days will result in forfeiture of assets." Each word dropped like a stone into water, ripples of consequence spreading outward. The sound filled the room, the scrape of chairs, the shuffle of papers, the rhythm of finality. Behind it, the faint hum of air vents layered a quiet monotony that made everything else feel painfully human. The wooden bench beneath me creaked softly. Even the gavel seemed to rest now, spent from striking. Reporters began whispering, pens tapping against notepads. A headline was already forming somewhere. "Corporate fraud, exposed in family feud." They would print my name, though I hadn't sought any. I could almost hear the keystrokes outside, the world digesting justice like gossip. He tried to speak. "This isn't over," he muttered, voice low but shaking. The judge looked up, eyes cool, bored even. "It is," she said. The crowd shifted. A woman near the aisle whispered, "Finally." Someone else exhaled, like they'd been holding their breath for years. The arbiter gathered her files and handed me one crisp sheet, a copy of the signed order. My hand brushed the paper's edge. The texture was thin, almost brittle, yet it carried the weight of months, years maybe, of silence now quantified and reversed. Proof of wrongdoing and its remedy reduced to a signature and seal. When I stepped outside, the applause followed, spilling from the courtroom like light through an open door. Cameras flashed, voices rose, questions flew. "How does it feel to win?" one reporter asked. "It wasn't a competition," I said, walking past. "It was an ending." My sister caught up to me on the courthouse steps, eyes red but smiling faintly. "He has to pay," she said. I nodded. "He has to face it." Then quieter, "So do we." The wind tugged at the edges of the judgment copy in my hand. I folded it carefully, tucked it into my coat pocket, an artifact of consequence, not triumph. Down the steps, the crowd still lingered, holding phones high, chasing images of justice like souvenirs. I stopped halfway, feeling the vibration of sound beneath my shoes, the faint, rhythmic echo of clapping against stone. It wasn't celebration. It was release. I closed my eyes for a moment. The air smelled faintly of rain on marble. Somewhere above, the courthouse clock struck 3, its bells spilling through the sky like closure trying to become peace. When I opened my eyes again, the street stretched forward, gray and alive. I walked down, leaving the noise behind, feeling every step loosen something I hadn't realized I was still holding. The crowd cheered. I only exhaled. Silence has its own temperature. The house felt larger than it ever had before, each room echoing with a different kind of absence. The door clicked shut behind me, and the sound lingered, soft and hollow. I stood still, listening to the quiet until I could almost hear the rhythm of my own pulse in the walls. The air was cold, drifting in from a half-open window. It carried the faint scent of rain, the kind that leaves behind nothing but chill. On the kitchen table lay the insurance forms, the final ritual of damage turned official. I filled them out slowly, my handwriting deliberate. The claim was for the railing, the one he'd grabbed during the last argument before everything broke. I called it property damage, though the truth was heavier than the paperwork could hold. Proof of closure, not need. The insurer would never know the story behind the numbers, the bruises that didn't make it into reports. I placed the documents into an envelope, sealed it, and laid it beside the folded blanket on the armchair. Dust motes floated through the air, catching a thin line of light that slipped through the curtain. For a moment, I let my hand rest on the blanket, the fabric cool beneath my skin. It was strange how objects stayed loyal when people didn't. The house groaned softly in the wind. A loose hinge on the upstairs door tapped against its frame, steady as a heartbeat. I'd forgotten how sound could be both comfort and accusation. I walked to the living room and sat in the same chair where I'd once fallen. The scar along my arm caught the chill, a reminder carved into me, uninvited yet honest. I traced it with my thumb, following its crooked path like a map of everything I'd lost and learned. The phone buzzed once, a message from my sister. Just 2 words. I'm sorry. I stared at the screen for a long time, waiting for something, anger, forgiveness, anything, to rise. Nothing came. I set the phone face down. Some words are only meant to travel one way. The clock on the mantel clicked past another minute. I hadn't realized how much I'd come to measure peace by silence instead of safety. For years, noise had meant life, arguments, doors, footsteps, his voice. Now quiet had a different meaning. It wasn't emptiness. It was recovery, still fragile, still cold. Outside, the sky began to fade from gray to silver. I went to close the window, but paused when a draft brushed my face. It wasn't just air. It was memory, faint but familiar. The same kind of cold that had filled this room the night I left. Back then, I'd promised myself I'd return only when I could stand here without shaking. I ran my palm along the window frame, the paint chipped and worn. This time, my hand was steady. The protector from the insurance office called to confirm receipt. "You'll be reimbursed within 10 business days," he said. His tone was polite, efficient, unknowing. "Is there anything else you'd like to declare?" I hesitated. "No," I said. "That's all that's left." After the call, I walked through the house slowly, touching surfaces like landmarks. The photographs were still gone, removed long ago when I couldn't bear to see our faces together, but their absence had softened. The shadows had settled into corners without menace. Even the air felt different, balanced, almost gentle. I made tea and carried the cup to the porch. Steam rose and vanished into the evening. Across the yard, the garden had gone untended, the soil cracked, the chairs overturned from the last storm. I'd repair them in time. For now, I let them be. Not everything needed fixing right away. The temperature dropped as the sun slipped behind the trees. I wrapped the folded blanket around my shoulders. Its weight was familiar, the way warmth sometimes remembers you when people forget. The silence deepened, no longer sharp, but soft-edged, like a room finally learning how to breathe again. I watched a single dust mote drift through a shaft of fading light, spinning until it disappeared into the still air. The house finally stopped whispering. I mailed the last letter to myself. It came back 3 days later, the envelope worn, edges soft from travel. My own handwriting stared back at me in blue ink, neat, deliberate, older than I remembered. The postal stamp smudged the corner like a bruise of time. For a moment I held it close, the paper faintly warm from the afternoon sun. The house was quiet except for the creak of the floorboards and the faint ticking of the clock above the mantel, each second sounding like a small reminder that life moves forward, even when you don't. I tore the envelope open carefully. Inside, a single folded note. My scent from years ago clung faintly to it. Lavender, almost gone, but not forgotten. The handwriting was mine, though steadier, more hopeful. "You survived," it read. 2 words, nothing more. But it was enough to stop the room from spinning. I sat at the desk, tracing the wax mark I had sealed years earlier, its surface now cracked. The candle beside me flickered, casting light that trembled across the paper. I remembered writing that letter on a night heavy with rain, after one of those endless arguments that felt louder than thunder. I had mailed it to my mother back then, but it had come back unopened, unacknowledged, like a truth the world wasn't ready to receive. Now it had returned again, addressed to me, as if the universe had completed a circle I didn't know was still open. I smiled faintly. Sometimes closure doesn't arrive in words, it arrives in the waiting that ends. The witness from the postal office had called earlier that morning. "We found this in a redirected archive," he'd said. "Old but traceable." His tone was neutral, kind. I thanked him, not for the letter, but for the fact that someone still cared enough to return something so long lost. I pressed the note flat against the desk and studied the way the ink had faded, how each loop and stroke seemed steadier than I remembered being when I wrote it. Maybe that was the point. The past version of me had believed in a future version strong enough to open it. The air carried a faint scent again. Lavender, or memory pretending to be lavender. I closed my eyes for a moment and breathed it in. The candle flame hissed softly as it bent under a small draft. "You survived," I whispered to myself, the words strange but familiar, echoing back with quiet reverence. The drawer beside me groaned when I opened it. Inside were fragments of the last few years, old bills, a faded court notice, photographs that once hurt to look at. I placed the letter among them, face down, as if giving it rest. Paper doesn't heal, but it remembers. For the first time in months, I felt the urge to write again. Not to anyone, not even to her, but to the space between what was and what might still be. I pulled a clean sheet of paper toward me, uncapped the pen, and began without overthinking. "Dear you," I wrote, "you are not done." The candle's wax had begun to pool, a small puddle of gold light reflecting on the desk. I leaned back and let the warmth reach my fingertips. Somewhere outside, a mail truck passed, its tires crunching gravel, a reminder that movement was still possible, even in stillness. I folded the new letter, sealed it with care, and set it beside the old one. 2 lives, bound by paper and time. The scent of lavender lingered in the air, a faint trace, nothing more, but enough to remind me that even loss leaves its fragrance. As I turned off the lamp, the room fell into soft shadow. I heard the quiet rustle of the curtains, the whisper of air finding its way in. Some messages, I realized, were never meant to travel far. They just needed to be written. Some mail never needed a destination. The stairs waited, unchanged. Morning Light Lodge looked smaller now, stripped of its menace by time and exposure. Reporters had already gathered near the entrance, their cameras angled toward the porch where I once fell. A year had passed since that day. 12 months of hearings, statements, and slow rebuilding, and yet the air here still carried a memory I could taste. The scent of old pine and polish, the hush that follows an echo. The arbiter stood beside me, her tone measured. "They just want a few words," she said. "You don't owe them anything more." "I know," I answered, eyes fixed on the steps. "But some stories sound different when spoken where they happened." The reporter approached, microphone trembling slightly in his hand. "How does justice feel?" he asked. I let the question hang in the cold morning light. My breath fogged before me like a small confession. I looked at the stairs. Same wood, same tilt, same quiet defiance. "It feels like standing," I said. A sunbeam filtered through the cracked window, landing on the photo frame that still hung crooked near the entryway. The glass caught the light and scattered it across the floor, gold flecks on old scars. I stepped closer. Inside the frame was that same image, Mark smiling, unknowing, before it all collapsed. The paper edges had curled, but the smile remained, careless and permanent. I remembered the words that had haunted me for a year. He smiled before he pushed me. Now, standing in that very light, I smiled back, not out of forgiveness, but reclamation. The difference between falling and standing was no longer distance. It was will. The reporter shifted, searching for another question. "Would you do it all again?" he asked. "Justice doesn't ask if it's worth it," I said. "It asks if it's true." Behind me, the arbiter checked her watch, then murmured, "We should go soon." "Just a moment," I said. "I need to see something." I walked toward the base of the staircase. Each step creaked the same way it had before, the sound sharp but honest. The wood had been replaced in one section where the fall had cracked it. I ran my hand along the railing, feeling the faint ridge where splinters had once cut into my palm. Time had smoothed it, but not erased it. Some wounds are better remembered than forgotten. The press crew began packing their equipment. Outside, the light had shifted again, spilling through the open doorway in wide strokes. Dust swirled in the glow, tiny floating reminders that stillness can shimmer too. On a small table by the wall sat a red mug, chipped at the rim. I hadn't noticed it before. It was the same mug from that morning, the one I'd left untouched after the argument began. Someone had kept it, cleaned it, placed it back, as if restoring balance to a story that refused to end mid-sentence. I lifted it, felt its weight, and set it down again exactly where it had been. The reporter turned once more, voice gentler this time. "Do you feel safe here now?" I smiled faintly. Safe isn't the right word, present is. Outside, the arbiter held open the door, sunlight framing her silhouette. "You ready?" she asked. I nodded, taking one last glance around the room. The air had changed. It wasn't heavy anymore, just awake. I looked at the crooked frame once more. For a moment, the light through the window flared brighter, catching both our reflections in the glass. Mine steady, his fading. I stepped into the morning air. The reporters dispersed. The arbiter walked beside me, and the world beyond the gate hummed with ordinary life again. The gravel crunched under my shoes, grounding each step. Some places never forget what happened within them, but they can still forgive your return. The fall ended where standing began.